what we've been working on for the last few months is a mapping tool. And so basically this website, which currently only the department has access to, for the first time combines about 7 different resources in terms of data layers for mapping. This tool is under initial development. So basically what happened was we went out, started following our new standard operating procedures for audits. And what we found were most of the maps in those plans were missing some of the elements that Bob and Aaron talked to you this morning about. More often than not, wellheads were not identified. Certainly agricultural wells the farmer should be aware of and be able to identify on the map. But what's really important for nutrient management is those that aren't on the farm at all. And we realized that that's a limiting data source for plan writers to be able to acquire that information and then put it on the plans. And we don't particularly care about how you generate the aerial images, but or how you get the information drawn onto them. We just really care about all the elements being there. And for whatever reason, things were frequently missing. What really got my attention was some aerial maps didn't even have the soil information. And I'm not really confident that a plan is going to be 100% useful to a farmer if they're not aware of what soil conditions are on that farm. So we realized that part of the reason that was probably occurring is because you go to the U.S. Department of Agriculture to get soil information. You might try to access a DNREC data source to get wellhead information. And at the end of the day, you still have to draw field boundaries on the map. And so that's a big challenge in terms of finding time and finding those data resources in order to draw a map that's in compliance with our regulations. The other reason we wanted to build a tool was because we realized that there are a lot of best management practices on a farm that we don't necessarily capture in an annual report. So when we mail to your clients the one-page document that asks them what their activities were for nutrient applications in the last year, we're not asking things like, did you use a PSNT? Have you soil tested more often than once every 3 years? Do you have a manure storage structure on the farm? And so those are additional things that are required for the maps, but we don't necessarily have great capture for our data keeping. And so we thought adding this tool would give us an opportunity to physically track in space where BMPs are being put on the landscape, and might make it easier for us to do these audits and determine where to look for particular practices that are important for nutrient management purposes. We also noticed that frequently private drainage ditches were also missing. These are elements that are required to be drawn on the map again, but we also noticed that most places for which the consultants are going to find aerial photos with overlaid spatial information, they might have natural streams, but they wouldn't have text ditches. That's another DNREC data source that we're able to pull from and put all together in this one platform. Now, having said all that, we've spent $0 and 0 cents on what I'm about to show you. And so, if you're wondering how that's possible, the answer is it doesn't work right. I'm putting this in front of you in cooperation with our information technology department so that I can actually get some feedback on how to make it better. I made a little quip before you guys went to eat that when you look at the key at the bottom of the maps that this thing prints out, it's not even labeling half of what you see on the screen right now. The blue dots with the black center position, Those are wellheads. That's not identified in the key whatsoever. So that's something that's obviously important, because when the farmer goes to read that map, they need to understand what those symbols represent. What I really want to do today is give you a test drive and get some information back from you about what tools you might be using and how this might be better, or how it might be missing features that would prevent you from using it. We are not writing plans on a day-to-day basis, so we can't always guess what's useful to you. We did try though. So for example, I have a login for this application, and I can go in and I can draw these maps, but I can also see the boundaries that anyone else has drawn. So what might happen if I were to provide access to some of our plan writers in the state is you might start drawing over each other. Or there might be a client that switches from one consultant to another, and now that you're working with that farmer, you might realize that their boundaries were drawn wrong. Or you might be a consultant that doesn't really appreciate that other consultants can see what you've drawn on the map. And so we've also considered the possibility of having the self-identified information that's entered here be unique to a user, but that's going to increase the cost. So that's the kind of thing that I want to find out if that's useful to you all. So if you can see in the back, I hope you can. If you can't, feel free to get up and move to the front. What we're looking at is a few things. I will mention that what's in bright yellow in the center of the screen is a field boundary that's been hand drawn using this application. And I'm going to try to hand draw one in front of you, and I can tell you right now, using this trackpad, it's not going to go well. But we have a menu that floats in and out here, and so I can go to this field of it looks like some kind of grass cover, and I can scroll down and choose a highlighted field boundary or a non-highlighted field boundary and start clicking the edges. And as I go around this field, it's going to start drawing the shape of that field. I should have chosen an easier field to draw. That's okay. What I do like about this tool is it's reminding me every time when I get to the last position to double click, because that's easy to forget. And it's probably going to spin away for a second while it draws that, as long as I did it right. Field boundaries are one of 5 things that we've built in to have the consultants be able to label. These are the things that we don't think we already captured. Oh, thanks. We've also included private drainage ditch, and that purple color is similar to the magenta color that the DENREC tax ditch file uses. So we're trying to use a scheme of color coding, but we also know that DENREC's maps of ditching may not be the most up-to-date or accurate, especially because all these things are drawn on a particular projection of the aerial maps, so they may not line up perfectly. I think any of us that had GPS units in the early 2000s know that not everything always lines up with where you are, and certainly things have gotten better, but in mapping tools, that's fine, I'll wait. But in mapping tools, it's not always one-to-one. We've also included driveways. That's not something that's going to be in the del dot layer if you have a private drive. So we have those available for consultants to be able to draw lines, and these are pretty simple lines. You just click the points for which you want the driveway to be labeled. And then, even though it didn't show it for the field boundary I tried to draw, it does have some text that you're able to enter. In this case, there's only two options. There's pervious and impervious. We want to know specifically when we come onto a farm whether those lanes are hard paved or if they might be gravel, because we need to observe more carefully where fertilizer and manure is being applied if that's an impervious surface. That's going to fail your audit every time if we drive up and you got a paved drive and there's a bucket of litter sitting out. You're going to have a bad audit that day. But we want to be able to know when we drive out to the farm and start driving around the farm, if we need to do spot checks of certain things, whether that's going to be a pervious or impervious surface. So that's something that we had built in. And then just to round it out, I've got BMPs here. Right now those are just points, because frankly what we really wanted to do was just offer an opportunity for the consultants to include the information for the BMPs that they identify. So we have a drop-down menu of typical BMP types that we look for when we're going on a site visit. That's a manure shed, a compost, or a heavy use area pad. And then you can self-enter any map label that you'd like. If you'd like to identify the track number for which that BMP is installed, say it's a PSNT and it applied to this track number or FSA ID, you can enter that information here. And as soon as you close it, it saves it. So we've entered BMP information for that particular point. And then finally, I mentioned a little bit about wells and the challenges those have. This is again DENREC data. So these wells that are identified using this particular legend, they can be many, many forms of wells, as you can see by all the symbols here. But these are only wells that have been identified for the period of which DENREC's building these maps. So if for some reason a farmer is aware of a well that wasn't identified, we've added in our tools over here a method for them to be able to select what type of well to add and what significance that well has. There's potable and non-potable wells, and those that are on the farm have different setback requirements for manure application than those potable wells that are not on the farm. So we've got different labeling schemes for those. That covers all the things that consultants can physically add. Are there any of you aware of any features that you've been adding to maps that we might want to consider putting on top of what's been identified here? Based on some of your reactions, I think we probably captured more things than you're usually putting on, and that's okay.
You're just using the maps themselves, the overlay for the wooded areas and tree lines, that kind of thing first?
So, question about the aerial images. There's no regulatory requirement to have tree lines or anything identified, but we do require that an aerial image be overlaid with the field boundaries, and that's just in an effort to make sure that there's been enough diligence in getting those field boundaries accurate. If it crosses over a wooded tract, you can better believe I'm going to ask how old the image is and whether those trees are still there and whether they're accounted for in the plan or not.
And you can do a boundary within a boundary. You can highlight an impassable area or something like that, or a non-plantable area. Like we typically have 3 or 4 fields that have cemetery in them.
Great question. Thanks for asking it. So in terms of boundaries within boundaries, all I can do is try to do it in front of you. So like I said, this is totally under development, but I can see over here that there's a house plot that's included in this boundary area.
Yeah.
And so I should be able to click around the same portion and be able to exclude that house as long as the mouse picks up my clicks. should mention, since I, for some reason, selected the original field boundary, you can add details to the field boundaries here, similar to the BMPs, and this is just standard text you can enter, and there's also the ability to view it in an attribute table if you want to download the information in an Excel form, so that you might be able to summarize different field attributes for an entire farming operation. There really is the ability to select out an area, but I'm not sure what's causing it to not register. I guess it's worth what I paid for it for now. Thanks for the question.
What about slopes?
So we didn't talk about the soil field boundaries, but we are capturing that information.
You get into mapping units, right?
So I just want to show everybody the operational layers, and then I'll get to your specific question. The well information is from specifically the consultant entered, BMP the same way, driveways, private drainage ditches, and field boundaries. That's all consultant entered data at the top of your layers, and they're all independent layers. So that's how I know, even though I can't demonstrate it for you today, that they can go over each other. We have Delaware's major rivers and streams. That's in an effort to identify blue line streams on the maps. And then specifically about the soils, we're capturing that NRCS soil information, and that's by county. And so you have to turn those on and off depending on where the farm is. It is a huge data set. It does include slopes. It includes all the soil series information as metadata when you go to select those units. Now I handed you guys the maps, and you can see better on a color version, but those soil areas are identified and you can select them. When you click on them right now, there is a load time issue where you think you've done something wrong, but really it's just trying to bring all that information in. And anybody that's played with the soil maps at the national scale, you've endured that process of load times. I suppose it's probably better now than when I was in grad school, but it's a challenge. We have the tax ditch information, and this came with a huge caveat from DENREC that it's not complete, but that they've done as good a job as they plan to do for the foreseeable future in capturing that. There's also a roads layer, and this is built by DelDOT, and I have no idea what any of this scale stuff means. We've asked them to simplify it because as DelDOT adds projects, they add different subsets of layers on there, and that's not useful to any of us, in my opinion. So they have been working with us pretty carefully trying to make that useful. I'll skip ahead to the water well permits. You can see we covered just how many of those well types there are, and luckily DENREC's done a nice job of categorizing these with symbology that is kind of coding to what the purpose of that well is. And then the tax parcel information is really helpful for us so that we can identify any change in land ownership. And I know that sometimes those tax parcels are helpful in identifying field boundaries. If there's two adjacent fields owned and operated by separate farmers, in an aerial map it may not be obvious where that field boundary is. So having that tax parcel information included, we understood was helpful, and that's you can see that rendered here with the home cut out from the rest of that agricultural parcel. I'll be honest, I'm a big nerd. And I thought what was really cool about this project is for the first time we're able to offer center pivot irrigation information. So if you've been staring at this screen for the last 10 minutes of my talk, you might be figuring out slowly what these what these green circles are. And so what we got from USGS is a layer of center pivot irrigation that was hand-drawn by USGS staff, and they've agreed to update this on the order of every 5 years. This is an issue that we run across more every year with over 150,000 acres in Delaware being irrigated. We have about a 20% hit rate for audits that we perform for which the irrigation is identified in the aerial maps, and that's about it. So 4 and 5 plans are wrong and don't have this information. I also don't expect farmers to remember to give their consultant this information. So we thought that, you know, getting this would be a great visual cue to you consultants to be able to remember to ask if you've added any irrigation. But it is not the most current thing, just like everything else in this tool. We're slaves to how quickly people put this information together. And all this does is render what we've got. So that covers all the layers, and it covers what the tool can do so far. I had a couple questions for you guys if you're done eating. It looks like you are. We realize that there are a lot of challenges with preparing maps, and I was wondering if there's anything that you guys run into that this application does solve or you hope could solve.
I think we should do one for Maryland too. We're still clicking around on Google Earth and I hate it, and I want this very, very much. So good for y'all.
There's a lot of vendor farm management software that lets you do a lot of this stuff. There's Echelon, there's CPS, there's other farm management software things like LandDB that lets you do a fair number of these things. It doesn't always network well with some of the other information, but a lot of them do. I guess just one question that I did have for you though was if you could run down that list one more time of the things of just 1 through 6 or 1 through 8 of the things that you want to see on a map.
Yeah, perfect.
Just to make sure I didn't miss any during the.
I'm going to punt the question.
Okay.
What we're going to email to everybody that attended today in our session last week is a list of our checklist for an audit. The very middle of that checklist is the 7 things we're looking for on our aerial maps. So you guys will have it electronically and permanently in your email to be able to reference. That's easier than me reciting it and you guys trying to scribble it down.
But I guess as you work with this, if you do have access to maybe look at things like map shots or LandDB or Echelon and kind of see the kind of options that they make available in those to help figure out what's more useful for this and maybe what's not, what's just kind of fluff that the other software offers.
Thanks. All right, got those 3 names. I did want to mention that we've seen plenty of plans where there's no one-stop shop, but the plan writer did the best they could. So we might have 3 pages for one particular tract, and each of those 3 pages capture a little bit something different on that tract to get to all 7 points. That's absolutely fine. So if any of you have another software that you're using that captures 3 or 4 of the things, and you want to get onto this website and capture the other 3 or 4, that's perfectly fine. While you may not be saving any trees, you're at least keeping your clients out of trouble. And we did anticipate that. We don't want to force anybody into any solution. I know that there are a lot of yield maps that make their way into nutrient management plans. I think those are great. Well, I also don't want to collect that information and keep it in a publicly accessible form. So guess what? You're going to have to do that separate, and that's for the protection of your client's private data. But hopefully, if you're worried about, the eventuality of having an audit on your client's farm and forgetting the pivots, clearly there's going to be a time where there's a grace period. We're trying to work with people to get things right, and we realize that it's our duty to also provide that information the best we can. That's why we're putting this together. Are there any features on here you guys found especially useful besides the irrigation? Did anybody have an alternative method to digging up the well information? Or were you accessing state records? Or no records at all? This is a safe space, I should mention. If you want to admit something here, we're here to help. That's the whole point. You get credits, and I make sure that you pass the next audit.
Did you show watershed codes?
You know, I think we had that question last time, and we actually gave that to the developer to include, and I haven't been able to make them show up. So to give him the benefit of the doubt, I hope they're in here because we asked for them, but chances are it's not a beautiful tool yet. It doesn't work perfectly. I haven't been able to draw it up. We do realize that, that those have changed over time. Delaware is a really flat state, so to be able to keep those boundaries the same for all eternity was never really the intent. So we want to put the most accurate and up-to-date information for watershed boundaries in there. Those are required on the annual report, so that is important.
You talking down to the hot level, Avery, or just?
Major, I think,
We have it.
yeah, we have that.
I think the nutrient management program is working on
Yeah.
older
Yeah, we do it for our
costs
stuff.
for years.
Yeah, our program's using an out-of-date map right now, just because it hasn't changed since the first year we required watersheds be reported, and it absolutely drives the GIS guys nuts. They call our watershed code the HUC 11, which doesn't exist if you know that system. It's somewhere between a HUC 10 and 12. That's what our old maps were based on. So we're trying to bring it up to date, and obviously if you include the most recent watershed information, that's the best. But we have to respect those that haven't come around yet.
Because Denver has the HUD 12. So, I mean, it's
And,
available.
and if anybody has an urgent need to know watershed codes, we've already actually developed a website where you can just type an address in, and it'll geolocate it with that information. And if you want to be able to access that, just take one of my cards on the table, and I'm happy to email you the link. Okay, the only other thing I wanted to mention again was about the data sharing. This is the difference between producing a $15,000 project, which is about what we have here with a few changes, and a $35,000 project with user registration costs. And I'm not saying fees, I'm not looking to pin any of that on the consultants to be able to use this. This is supposed to be a service that we provide to help you. But if you were to keep your data separate from other consultants' data so that they couldn't see it, that's something that I want to hear back. If you want to use it as public access for where the field boundaries are, we can keep this real cheap.
So Chris, maybe clarify what information would be shared
Sure.
and what wouldn't.
So all of the layer list here is from the Delaware major rivers down to the tax parcels. That's all public information. So that's gonna render itself, and you turn it on and off whether you want to include it or not. Please include it. There's a reason that it's there. Field boundaries all the way up to water wells that are self-added. These are items that are associated with a user of the tool. We can associate with them. We can associate the data with a user account, which would require you to log in and keep a password and keep it safe from anybody you don't want editing your data. And that's something that I should add. If it's up here and there's no protection, then anybody else can go in there and start dragging lines around by accident. I see heads shaking. So we probably want to have unique users. That's something we anticipated. And so the follow-up question we had at the last meeting, and I have for you guys today, is if those clients decide to change consultants, say you gained a customer from someone else, Is it going to be useful for you to use this tool if you have to redraw everything that the previous consultant drew? Basically start from scratch with that customer, even though you know that their previous plan had the maps done already. I personally, as project manager for this, thought if it's a new client, it's a new client. It's no different than if you didn't have this tool to go back and redraw everything. But the only way to share one consultant's information with another consultant's information is to share all of it, which we don't want to do unless there's some changeover in ownership of a company, somebody passing along some clients en masse.
I would say that your point of if all the information was shared and somebody else could go in and start moving lines around, I feel like that is more troubling potentially than having to start over with a new client, right? So
Agreed.
the benefits of having the individual logins outweigh the cost of picking up a new client, because like you said, without the tool, if you guys got a new client, you'd have to do all that from scratch anyway.
Is there a way to export the changes on this essentially as a shape file, and then the operator of the farm, the person who has the farm would have their own, could download and save their own shape files of their fields, and then if they switch consultants, they can just go ahead and email the shape files to the new consultant. And then if this could upload the shape files, then the drawings would already be there.
Right, good question. This tool does not allow you to download shape files.
Okay.
That's the difference between not a $15,000 and $30,000 project. That's the difference between $30,000 and $150,000, from what I've been told, to have that capability. There is no capability here of counting acres. It does not measure the size of the boundaries that you're drawing. We did that on purpose, believe it or not. We heard from consultants and other clients that that's only going to counteract or contradict, rather, what they're getting in terms of information for crop insurance with FSA. Basically, that tract ID already has a number of acres associated with it, and so if we had a conflicting tool with its own calculated information, that's just going to create problems for people. And we said, great, let's not pay for it.
Well, if it was each individual consultant on this, Chris, would they be able to save this file then?
This is a live system. That's how it works. So when you're working in it, it's saving, much like Google Drive. If you're working on a document, as you're working, it's saving it, and you have to go in and physically delete things you want to remove. And it is unique for every user. So I can see what other guys have done, but that's just because we're in the building phase. When that's all complete, that will be yanked out, and you're looking at your own information and space for you and your clients. Yep, that's right.
Is your question about like saving to print perhaps?
Yeah, that's part of it. Or to save it on your own computer or the network or whatever. It's for future use.
So I'll make one more point, and then I'll just finish with a plug. This is only useful if you can print the maps out. So we do have a printing capability. The way that the print works is it's going to print out what's highlighted on the screen. So you have to drag to where the field or fields are, center them on the screen, select the print application, and it's going to generate a PDF or an image file, whatever you're comfortable with, and it's going to generate that map that I gave to you. Like I mentioned, the legend is utterly worthless right now. We're going to work on that in the interim, but what you have in front of you is the way that map is generated to go into the nutrient management plan. So if there's anything missing on here besides a complete legend that you guys would like to see, please come see me, either today after the talk or into the future. And if anybody amongst you would like to help work on this project and make it more useful, I'm also interested in putting a few consultants together in order to keep developing this, because I've gotten positive feedback at both meetings now, and we'd like to continue with the project.
It seems if you have public layers, public domain layers, and then you can export them, and then you could do your own thing for your client. No one sees that. That'd be good.
Certainly, you can create images from this tool without drawing anything of your own on there. All these layers that exist from the public domain, you can just make into a picture and open it in any picture editing software you use and draw your own lines on it, put your own data in there. You can feel free to do that.
You can't export it.
You can export picture files. That's right. It is not a robust tool. This is a web application.
Okay.
Yeah, this is not in any way, shape, or form what I would consider software. It's a live system. Good questions, guys. Thanks for the interaction.